Hi, everybody. Welcome back to ATD's Ask a Trainer series. I'm Jess Thompson, Content Manager for Learning and Development at ATD. On this month's episode, I have the pleasure of chatting with Kelly Jones and Jody Lumsden, authors of Needs Assessment on a Shoestring, the latest release from ATD Press, and the first book in ATD's On a Shoestring series. On this episode, we're chatting about needs assessment and 5 must-haves for a successful needs assessment strategy. So stick around. Hi, Jody and Kelly. Welcome to this episode of Ask a Trainer. How are you both doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having us, Jess.
Well, I am so happy to have you. We're going to be talking about your new book, which is Needs Assessment on a Shoestring, and I have it right here. Congratulations to you both. But before we dive into talking a little bit more about your book, would you like to share a little bit about yourselves? Kelly, can we start with you?
Sure. I am a researcher, curriculum theorist, director, consultant, really specializing in learning and development, professional development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And my name is Jody Lumsden. I specialize in adult and workplace learning, curriculum planning, change management, and leadership coaching.
I'd love to know if you could give us just a little overview of what's in this book. How is this book structured?
Yeah, so I think this is a framework within a framework, and it's basically a collection of resources shaped like a book. So what we wanted to take a really complex contextual area of work with needs assessment and make it understandable, make it scalable, because some projects are really small and short term, and some are company wide and massive. So within the book, you'll find ATD's fantastic build, borrow, buy framework, and that just really helps you think through, what do you have to create from scratch, what resources exist that you can leverage, what do you have to, to actually go out and purchase or invest in. And we twisted that a little bit with the idea that sometimes what you need is buy-in, right? And how do you get that? Because no one can conduct a needs assessment 100% by themselves. They are always collaborative to some extent. And then kind of tried to shape and structure all of the ideas around a framework that sounds incredibly simple for work that is actually incredibly complex. So we broke that down kind of into a 3-part framework for a needs assessment. So the book is going to walk you through how to build the strategy, build the case, and then build your recommendations. And our hope is that outside of designing for training or conducting a training needs assessment, that this is really going to help folks see the needs assessment methodology applies to a lot of things at work. And hopefully this framework will then become transferable in a lot of different ways.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that's such a great point. As I was looking through the book, I think that both you and Jody have made this book so approachable. And you're right. I think needs assessment does solve many different problems. So I appreciate the framework, and I appreciate all the practical strategies and tips that you have shared throughout the book. And one of the things that you mentioned was stakeholder buy-in can sort of be this challenge. So I'm curious to know, it seems that there are many challenges, whether it's stakeholder buy-in or time and resource limitations. What sort of challenges does this book cover in the industry?
I think there's several, many that we've done that we list in the book, but the one that really highlights for me is that, initially how I got into needs assessment is that I was an instructional designer, and I was brought in to be sort of a support help for a big, large-scale needs assessment that was underway within an organization in which I was employed. And the key to that, and the big challenge in which we struggled with, I've seen it throughout all the other ones that I've been a part of, is just being able to, as an L&D professional, being able to explain the why. Why should we stop and not rush to a solution? But why is spending some time, slowing down to speed up, if you will, worthy? And I think that's one of the really great things that needs assessment really lets that professional step into the space where your job is to ask questions and not have the answers. And so when you think about the strategy that Kelly had just mentioned, like building the strategy, building the case, collecting the information, the very last thing is to offer recommendations. And I feel like a lot of times we could feel like we need to have the answers. We need to be quick to solution in order to be responsive to the needs of the organization. But reality, the worst thing we can do is to provide a recommendation or even a solution to something that doesn't really solve what's the business problem. And so needs assessment is just that tool that we can put into our toolbox and use when we need it, and hopefully on the regular, to be able to take pause, to say, gosh, yeah, your problem is worthy. And with that, we're going to take some time to really make sure we understand what's going on deeply so that we know what it is and be able to track if training is actually the best solution for you or something else.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. And you talked about asking questions, right? That's something that I noticed as I was reading. That's part of this framework that you and Kelly both talk about at the beginning of the book, that, and you've mentioned now, is just building the strategy, building the case, and recommendations. And there's these top 10 questions that you talked about. And then there's also some shoestring strategies for when you're going to be analyzing data, which comes after, building the strategy. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about this sort of methodology that you both wrote about as this just critical step and the first step when you're going to sort of activate a needs assessment or engage in a needs assessment. I'm curious to know, what sort of value does this add? And you sort of touched on this a little bit, Jody, but I'm also wondering, how practitioners can use this, and then also if you could share maybe one or two of the components within that overall framework that you talk about.
Yeah, that was one of the big challenges with writing this book, is because with something like a needs assessment, it kind of feels a little academic at times. It's a systematic approach to conducting an investigation, and so that was one of the things Kelly and I really tried to think about. How can we break it down into steps? And we came out with 10 components that we both felt were really critical in a needs assessment strategy. But we, challenged ourselves to think about, if someone were reading this and they were a department of one, or they were new, or they were really crunched on time, can they do 10? What do they have to do? What are the must-haves? And so we came up with, we were able to reduce it by half, which I was really proud of ourselves, because the 10 are really great. But if you really are on that shoestring, which is, the purpose of the book, and we really try to focus in on 5 basics, which is, you really need to know what problem you're trying to solve. You have to know that, no matter what. And it'll be really great for you to know, after you have the problem, to understand what the business impact is of that problem. Being able to understand where you are today and where you need to go. We talk about, the current state and future state, and being able to really understand that gap. We joke, we don't know if the gap is teeny tiny or it's gigantic. And whenever you're doing something like this, being able to capture the what's now and where you want to be in the future really kind of helps you understand lots of things. The solutions, but also timelines. If it's a gigantic gap, it just, you're looking at probably a longer term type fix. You have to know your stakeholders. You need to know who's involved, and even the ones that are on the fringe, because those are the things that'll pop up either after your needs assessment's complete, or they'll pop up in between, and it'll cause somewhat of a scope creep. And if you're really tight on budget, timeline, and all those things, you don't want to have secret stakeholders. You want to try to get that out up front. And the last one is, that research methodology. And again, it kind of sounds a bit academic, but, you really need to know, how in the world are you going to get this information? and where in the organization does it live? Who owns it? What areas of the organization might you have to partner with? Kelly mentioned it, earlier in the call that like needs assessments are very rarely, if ever, done alone. And so you're really going to have to identify all those things out there to ensure that you know what's wrong, what's the impact going to be, where are you going, when you need to get there, and who's going to be impacted by it. So those are the top 5. There's 10 total, and we encourage folks to really explore all of them. But that's sort of our short list, the must-haves of needs assessment.
No, that's great. I really enjoyed those questions as I was reading. It's one of the things that kind of stuck out to me as like the must-haves. If you can't ask all of these questions, so I really appreciate you kind of giving us a little sneak peek into those questions in the first section of your book. We've been talking a lot about how practical this book is, how rich it is with just worksheets and tips and strategies. And it just, I'm loving it as I'm reading it. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more, what are some of your favorite tips or strategies that you've kind of shared in your book that you might want to share with our audience?
I say this as a methodologist, like I identify as a researcher, is that needs assessment is really mindset first, followed by methodology. And I think that intuitively I had kind of operated that way in various points of my career and in various roles. But in really trying to encapsulate it and simplify it and explain it, the way you think about a needs assessment is kind of the precursor to any strategy or approach that you would follow. And so it is really interesting to me how simple it is to remind myself, and it sounds silly, but it's true. Put on your detective hat. Like, your job right now is not to solve this problem. Your job right now is not to make this recommendation or, and fix this, critical business problem. You have to start with curiosity, right? And it's one of the kind of overlaps. And I love seeing the increasing complexity of our industry, because I think instructional design used to be maybe a little siloed, or it was, I don't want to say it was kind of taught in a bubble, but I was taught in a bubble. And, over the last, especially the last 10 years, seeing the overlap and like the beautiful synergy with design thinking, with, data analysis, that our toolbox is expanded. But I think the way I think about needs assessment has really shifted. This is a mindset. This is a purpose-driven approach where you truly, like Jody said a minute ago, your job is to ask the right questions, and so it's just really surprising to me that ends up being the most simple and the most difficult part of this work.
What do you hope that folks will take away as they're reading this book? How do you hope that it will help with, career development, professional growth? Because, just looking through this book, I think this book is going to help a lot of folks. There's so much here, and I think we're all excited for folks to get a chance to dive into it. So what are your hopes for this book?
The hopes that I have personally for the book is that people gain confidence to take on this type of work. I remember vividly what it was like to take on the first needs assessment, and no textbook prepares you for this type of thing. If you're formally trained, with a degree or whatnot, it's really about following, a framework, and hopefully ours is super practical and easy to lift and customize, but really leaning into what really is your superpower as a learning development professional. And needs assessments are incredibly flexible, and they can really be done with any practitioner. So probably through this interview, or if you follow us on LinkedIn, and Kelly and I are very different practitioners. I think Kelly, she mentioned earlier, she identifies as a researcher. I would never identify forward as a researcher. Like I wouldn't do that, but I would identify as a creative and as someone who's curious. So this is something that it really transcends. Like you can be good at so many different things. You don't have to be good at the same things, and you can execute this and in service of your organization to really find the right problem, the right solutions. So for me, I hope you get confidence, and I hope you find something in the book that you can use and or make your own. And if you do, reach out to us. We'd love to know.
Well, and Jody, you posted a wonderful article on LinkedIn about the skill set, right? That you develop working on a needs assessment. I think one of my goals for this book would be helping practitioners identify and define the skills they already have. Because I think so much of the time, we wear a lot of different hats, right? I mean, that's the running joke in the book. It's like one of them is now a detective hat. But when you don't have sort of maybe the clarity of role step, take the job title instructional designer, and it can mean 20 different things at 20 different organizations. But as you gain experience or start doing new work, you end up with these really fantastic skills that build your capabilities, but you don't always know how to describe them or how to define them, And I think that in this book, we've really helped break that down to say, if you're leading a needs assessment, you're also doing project management. If you're advocating for funding for a certain aspect of your project, you are also gaining experience budgeting, right? If you are managing a group of stakeholders, that's leadership, right? That's strategic communication. So I think it helps just sort of highlight the skills that we don't always maybe know how to brag about well, or even how to intentionally develop, because not all of us have like a coach or, a mentor or something. So I hope people will see themselves and some of the great work that they've done, represented in this book, and like Jody said, gain confidence from that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share about this book?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to brag on my author here, or my co-author here. We always joke, I don't sell Jody's book, I sell Kelly's book. And so why would I encourage people to do this? Because of the amazing things Kelly's brought to the book. Folks, there's a fully worked example in the back. And that was the one thing that was a must-have for Kelly in this book, because, if you've never done it, you don't know what the end product looked like, or what's that process look like as you're going through data analysis, et cetera. And I just can't express that. And that's like, this is the book, that I wish I would have had. And Kelly really, really advocated for that, having that lens of, if folks never did this before, it's really hard to understand what it is. We have to show them what it is. And it is in the appendix. And I hope folks get to check that out, because that I'm going to use it as a reference.
Oh my gosh, you inspired all of it. And I'd have to say, like, again, working with Jody is so amazing because she is a creative. And so her approach to structuring things visually, communicating really complex ideas graphically, my brain does not work that way. And I think that if I had written a treatise on needs assessment, it would have been entirely too academic and not have that really creative spirit that Jody brought to this. So if you're looking through the book, and I hope you are, and you're like, that looks amazing, look at that visual, I get it now, that is because of Jody. And I think too, like, I would hope maybe this would inspire you to collaborate with somebody else. There have been a lot of things, I think, across both of our careers that I don't know that I would have undertaken alone, or learned as much, or gained as much from just as a solo practitioner. And needs assessments are collaborative, and so is this book. So
yeah, well, you both are wonderful, and this is such a fantastic read. I'm so excited for you both. Thank you again, Jody and Kelly, for being on this episode of Ask a Trainer. Kelly and Jody, if folks want to keep up with you, where can they find you if they have any additional questions? Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is candidframeworks.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, and it's the usual LinkedIn/profile stuff, Candid Frameworks there. And you can email me at kelly@candidframeworks.com.
Yeah, the quickest and easiest way is just to find me on LinkedIn. And my websites and email is all directly linked up there. And I'd love to connect with folks that have feedback or would like to let me know what they think about the book.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to keep up with all of the great things that Kelly and Jody have got going on, be sure to check out the show notes below. And if you want to find out when our next Ask a Trainer episode is going live, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon to be notified. I'm Jess Thompson with ATD.